Hey, how's it going guys? Captain Kuba here and welcome to my very late review of God of War Valhalla. The reason it's taking so long is because I took a bit of a break to play Vanquish and I got a little bit addicted to that game. And I also wanted to play Valhalla more, since this game in my opinion is the most replayable one in the entire Norse saga. Oops, did I already spoil that I liked the game? Well, there's more to this question than just saying whether I liked Valhalla or not, because I think this DLC has been one of the greatest ideas Santa Monica has ever had. But there's still things they could have done to improve it. And I want to talk about those things in case they ever decide to do a similar one in the future. So let's start with the biggest surprise surrounding this DLC, the genre they decided to attach to it, roguelike. Roguelikes have always been a very hit or miss genre for me. When I first played Dead Cells, I absolutely loved it. It was a game that offered speed, replayability, and an interesting world to explore. But soon after the release of Dead Cells, I started to get bored of the genre. Pretty much every indie game I saw on Twitter was a roguelike, and while they all had all those things that I liked from Dead Cells, they also started to feel very repetitive. It seemed like the cheap way to make a game was to create a fun enough combat system, create a couple of 2D levels that can be infinitely rehashed in their procedurally generated system, and create a story that on the surface seems deep, but in truth relies on symbolism and obscure lore to avoid writing any deep characters. There's nothing wrong with these types of games, the genre just got a little bit too overpopulated. For a while I had given up on the genre, but this all changed when I played Returnal. For once, a AAA game was given indie games a run for their monies in terms of a fun factor. For one thing, the game wasn't a traditional side-scroller, it was a solid third-person shooter with equally badass bosses and encounters. But the thing that set it apart from other roguelikes was its approach to the narrative, as it managed to combine the repetitive nature of roguelikes into the story itself. What I'm trying to say by talking about Returnal is that God of War Valhalla seems to have taken inspiration from that style of storytelling, all the while making it a very personal journey for Kratos. In the DLC, Kratos sees himself overcoming his past once and for all. The game begins with Kratos arriving at the shores of Valhalla, the place where all worthy souls come to rest, or so we thought. You see, one of the things I really like about Valhalla is how it subverts our expectations of what Valhalla is. Before God of War Ragnarok came out, I expected Valhalla to be this place where you would go after you died, and in typical God of War fashion, Kratos would have to fight his way out. I am so glad this isn't what we got, because even though Valhalla is a location, it kinda behaves like a character in its own right. Its main purpose being to take locations and people from Kratos' life and use them to get some growth out of him. But the story does it in a way that it doesn't feel fan-servicey. The reason Helios is in it is because deep down whenever Kratos looks at Mimir, he remembers how much of a monster he used to be. It's a subtle way to give all fans a nice callback to the Greek games while also continuing Kratos' Norse arc. Kratos also has to go through painful memories such as his pledge to Ares, the destruction of Greece, and his quest for ultimate power. And by touching on these moments, it offers players a new angle in which to see some of the events of the old games. God of War Valhalla joins Ghost of Sparta in the sense that it's not just a great story, but it also makes me appreciate the other stories in this series even more. All of these lessons culminate with Kratos once and for all accepting his role as the God of War, although guided by hope this time around. Now, even though I loved the game, there were some negatives that I wanted to bring up. And funny enough, one of my points of criticism is not really a criticism because Valhalla is protected by the term free DLC. So I shouldn't be complaining about it since I literally didn't have to pay a penny for it. But this DLC was such a great idea that I only wish Santa Monica would have tapped its full potential. Because with this story and all of these epic moments, it could have easily been one of the best roguelikes ever made. But as it stands right now, there are a couple of things that prevent it from becoming that, like how repetitive the levels get. And I know that repetitiveness is a defining quality of roguelikes. But in other games of the genre like Returnal for example, even though the levels follow a similar design every run, they offer something slightly different every time. This way, the game never stops feeling unique throughout the playthrough. In Valhalla, sadly, the only thing that is procedurally generated are the order of levels. Sometimes you will go to Muspelheim first, other times you will go to Jotunheim or Svartalfheim, but the levels themselves always look the same, which can get somewhat repetitive. Sometimes these levels won't even have enemies and just offer you a chest instead. This would have been fine if there were more sections before reaching the end, but Valhalla only has a few sections and a couple of larger enemies as bosses. Not gonna lie, it was cool to see Magni and Bodhi return as bosses again, but the series, or in this case Kratos' memories, are full of other bosses. Wouldn't it be cool if you got to fight the Barbarian King while Kratos was dealing with that specific memory? And another section where you would have to walk through a destroyed Greece and fight a god from that land as well? I'm also surprised that there was practically nothing about Kratos killing his first family. easily the event in his life that left him the most traumatized. Also, what about Athena or Zeus? Adding more locations and characters from Kratos' past would have gone a long way to help ease the repetitive nature of this game. And it doesn't even have to be Greek bosses only. What about Baldur, Heimdall, or Thor? Hell, even Odin. I would imagine that adding Norse gods wouldn't be too much work since they're already built. All they need is find a place to put them in. All I'm trying to say is, this concept of Kratos dealing with his memories is great. I just wish there was more of it in the game. Now, it would be very wrong of me not to give Santa Monica props for a couple of things they did in this DLC. For example, in traditional roguelikes there's always a lot more levels before reaching the end. They do this to give the player enough time to experiment with different abilities and overall prepare him with stats for the final boss. Valhalla doesn't have a lot of these levels, but it does something to compensate for that, and I thought it was a really smart design choice. Instead of giving you a lot of levels, what Valhalla does instead is give you a time limit that determines when the enemies in that area will go up a level. This makes the last section very stressful as you're constantly running around fighting enemies before they become more powerful. I should say that I meant stressful in a good roguelike way. You'll always be calculating whether the health you have is enough to carry you over to the next encounter, or if instead you should go back and buy some health or a resurrection stone that will give you an edge in battle but will make you lose time in the progress. It's just a really rewarding level that makes you think of new strategies constantly. You can also stay in this level a lot longer and go to the Desert of Lost Souls and the Aegean Sea for more stats and glyphs. In other words, Santa Monica found a way to bypass the traditional way of leveling up in roguelikes by giving you a time limit and tons of glyphs to collect all in one level. It reminds me of how Silent Hill was able to hide the system's limitations by covering the world in mist. It's genius game design that allowed them to save time and resources while still giving the player a rewarding experience. Now, it would be a sin if I didn't talk about the enemies of this game. For the beginning levels, they can be fun enough. But it turns into a party when you meet the classic Greek enemies. Enemies like the undead legionnaires, sirens, wraiths, and cyclops are back. Although I should say that some of them are reskins of Norse enemies. But a lot of them are completely new enemies, or at least all enemies reimagined for the new game formula. Some of these enemies are even more fun with this style of game. For example, it was really fun being able to jab a spear into a cyclops eye using the movable camera. Something that isn't possible in the old games to do because of its fixed camera approach. Seeing mechanics like these make me wish for a remake of those old games even more. There's also the Blade of Olympus. I have always expressed my disappointment with how this weapon was treated in this series, and God of War 2 is just a game plus bonus. And in God of War 3 it was a rage option that, aside from the downward thrust, it didn't feel very fun to use. But for the first time in the series, the blade feels like an actual weapon. You can hold down any of the attack buttons for a health bonus, which is lore accurate by the way. Also, if you do a parry at the right time, the blade will give you some of that rage meter back. Meaning if you get good enough at parrying, you can have the rage for a very long time. It's just a really rewarding weapon to use, and I really hope it returns in future games. And lastly, I need to give Santa Monica props for Tyr. I have not hidden the fact that I was very disappointed with Tyr in God of War Ragnarok. Tyr in Valhalla is a completely different character, or at least the other side of the character we didn't see in Ragnarok. And this badassery translates really well to gameplay. Because at first I thought fighting him would get repetitive, but every time I returned to fight him, he pulled out a new weapon or attack that kept this fight feeling unique throughout the whole playthrough. Needless to say, these Tyr fights have become one of my favorites in the entire Norse saga. And it was like this for a lot of things when it comes to gameplay. I loved spending time on the shore buying new perks and leveling up my stats. Hell, I was even okay with reading what each glyph offered, something I have very little patience for in the main games. And I think this is the case because in Valhalla, the game forces you to pick a glyph or stat at that specific moment. In 2018 or Ragnarok, the game lets you do it whenever you want. But at least for me, as long as I'm handling the enemies okay, I feel no need to interrupt my experience of the story to go and read stats. I don't know, I think the stat system and cooldown system work much better in a roguelike than it does in the main game. But I know I'm in the minority here. Now before I go, I do need to bring up some criticism of the story, or at least bring up something that worries me about the upcoming games. How do I say this? We are done with the being better story theme, right?
We must be better.
Because while the old games can be criticized for being all about vengeance, the same can be said about the Norse games being all about being better. Because it's reaching a point where Kratos is becoming unrecognizable. And look, for the most part, I loved Kratos in Valhalla. Just seeing how differently he talks to Mimir compared to the first game just shows how much Kratos has grown as a character. One of my favorite moments of this game is that cutscene where Kratos legit gets worried about Mimir's safety. You can really hear the worry in his voice. It's something I never expected from Kratos, but it's still a welcome character progression. But there's also things that Kratos did in this game that just rubbed me the wrong way. For example, no matter how much character development Kratos gets, I will never buy that he's really interested in talking to Mimir about his romantic life.
Oh, don't pretend to be interested in my romantic life, brother.
I am interested, and you are evading the question.
And it's not just that, it's the fact that he gets upset with him as if he was his mom.
Now, I am mad at you.
I say Kratos would never do this because I consider myself a pretty nice guy, but my interest in my friend's relationship is very minimal. I also got a similar feeling when Kratos talked with the Valkyries. He would approach them and just ask to tell him their life story. Go on, tell me about your upbringing because I am a good person and this is the type of things good persons do. It just makes Kratos sound really fake. And if you don't agree with me, give me your phone number. Just give it to me and I'll call you so I can tell you all about my life's hardships. Let's see how long you can stay being this nice guy. I don't know, maybe I'm a bit of a Grinch, but seeing Kratos being this super nice guy just feels out of character for him. Another thing that bothered me a little bit was the ending. No, not this part. This part was awesome. Kratos getting to finally overcome his past and redefine what it means to be a god of war.
Beautiful.
It's what comes before that rubbed me the wrong way. Never in a million years would I have expected Kratos to activate his inner Shakespeare mode and just start talking to himself.
Should I this same man? Should I sit, take, proclaim, lead, place myself in service?
A soliloquy is an interesting way to portray Kratos' inner monologue, but I just don't buy that Kratos would talk this much to himself. There's a moment in God of War 2018 that shows what Kratos is supposed to sound like. When they enter the Dark Elf Hive, Kratos tells Atreus, "A narrow path negates superior numbers." I love this line because it manages to say a lot with very few words. This is what Kratos is supposed to sound like, and I think he can still sound like this while also being a better person. No need to undo all of his awesome character development, the tone just needs to be tweaked a little bit. But when I put all of my points of criticism against what the game does well, it's easy enough for me to forget about its flaws. This DLC was a great way to bridge both sides of the fandom. You get all that awesome Greek music and enemies while also giving you a deep story that redefines a lot of moments from Kratos' past. I only bring up these points of criticism because I really want Santa Monica to do another roguelike. For a team that has never done one, they hit it out of the park with this one. Imagine getting a similar story with Thor, and he gets to deal with things from his past we never saw, like the death of his mother or his strained relationship with his father. Valhalla as a roguelike is probably the best setting for any roguelike I've ever played. I just wish there was more of it. But if there's not going to be one, at least I can rest knowing that Santa Monica gave us one of the biggest surprises of 2023, and I couldn't be happier. So there you have it guys, my final thoughts on God of War Valhalla. Let me know what you thought of it. And of course, let me know what you thought of the game as well. I know it's been well received by most of the fandom, but I still want to know your thoughts on it. Now before I go, I wanted to remind you guys to follow me on Twitter. I don't upload that many videos anymore, but I'm always on Twitter sharing fun facts of the series, or just sending you down Nostalgia Avenue. Also, if you haven't seen my reaction to Valhalla, make sure to click on this link. And lastly, make sure to subscribe, not just for the content, but because there's going to be a Sif cosplay livestream happening in a couple of weeks, and you really don't want to miss it. Now as always, I want to give a big thanks to all of my members for supporting the channel monthly. If it wasn't for you guys, I probably wouldn't be able to do YouTube, let alone do stupid things such as a Sif cosplay. I would also like to thank everyone who likes and shares my videos. I know it doesn't seem like much, but trust me, it really does help. And with that said, thanks for watching. And remember, go forth in the name of Valhalla.